before Guild and after Guild. This is how history is measured in the Imperium, not by the rise and fall of nations, nor by wars or empires, but by the creation of the Spacing Guild, the moment humans seized the stars for themselves. What you are about to witness is not merely a timeline. It is the story of a civilization that outlived its myths, its gods, and even itself. From forgotten Earth to far-off Arrakis, from the spark of the first fire to the blinding light of prescience, humanity has endured collapse, revelation, and metamorphosis. This is the time-lapse of Dune, a chronicle of 34,000 years of survival, ambition, betrayal, and vision. Humanity was born in darkness. On a small blue world known as Earth, Terra in the old tongues, our species emerged, crawled upright, and named the stars. Around 19,000 before the Guild, the earliest traces of organized human civilization were etched in stone, blood, and fire. From the Fertile Crescent to the icy tundras of the North, Homo sapiens learned to cultivate, to forge, and to wage war. Tribes became cities, cities empires. Empire bred ambition, and ambition begot innovation. Nuclear power was tamed. Artificial intelligence grew in shadow. Cybernetic augmentation was no longer a dream but a surgical reality. Humanity stepped into the age of circuits with the swagger of gods and the foresight of children. But Terra was not eternal. Climate collapse and overpopulation led to radical adaptation. The polar caps melted, deserts swallowed fertile plains. The equatorial regions became uninhabitable. Mega-arcologies towered above flooded ruins. In desperation and brilliance, humanity expanded into the solar system, establishing colonies on Mars, Titan, and Europa. Each world bred its own cultures, languages, and governing bodies. Mars was militarized. Europa became a technocratic haven. Titan, drenched in hydrocarbons, sheltered religious separatists. A patchwork of techno-states ruled by corporate dynasties, mercenary guilds, and nascent machine oligarchies emerged. This expansion began with the first millennium in space, spanning roughly from 14,200 to 13,004 before the Guild. During this time, known as the Little Diaspora, humanity completed the full colonization of the solar system. In time, the population living beyond Earth outnumbered those still planet-bound by a factor of 20 to 1. With the proliferation of colonies came the rise of independent houses, proto-feudal entities that evolved from Earth-based corporations, clans, and scientific trusts. These houses extended their reach to the stars, seeking exclusive resource rights, military superiority, and prestige. But with distance came divergence. Rivalries erupted not only over territory, but over ideology, tradition, and access to forbidden technologies. The era saw a transformation in the logic of warfare. As houses fortified themselves across light years, it was discovered that if one's interstellar fleet was destroyed, their atomic stockpiles became inert, unable to be delivered. This led to a brutal innovation: planetary intimidation. If a rival's fleet was compromised, orbital atomic strikes could be launched with impunity. Imperial atomics once annihilated a rebellious house major from orbit, erasing every trace of its existence. In the centuries that followed, houses would often surrender preemptively if atomic platforms were placed above their skies. This balance of terror laid the groundwork for the later structure of the Great Convention, a proto-political agreement where mutual destruction preserved the illusion of peace. The use of atomics would resurface millennia later, on Arrakis, beneath twin banners of prophecy and vengeance. Then came the asteroid impact, sometime before 13,402 before the Guild. It struck the Indian Ocean with a fury unmatched in recorded memory. The resulting tsunamis and atmospheric ash plunged the Earth into crisis. It was not extinction, but a thinning, massive loss of life. The Earth's biosphere destabilized. In the aftermath, the United Earth government, the last vestige of Terran unity, relocated its capital to Ceres, deep in the asteroid belt. The new seat of power was a hollowed dwarf planet, humming with artificial life. The cradle of humanity was not destroyed, it was abandoned. This moment when Earth was reduced to myth is the first great rupture in human memory. From this point forward, our species became irreversibly nomadic, our stories stitched across stars instead of rivers. Freed from the cradle, humans burst outward in a wave of colonization, hungry, bold, and fractured. By 12,000 before the Guild, the stars had new names and new tongues. Over 1,000 star systems glittered with Terran legacy, seeded by brave fools and solemn visionaries alike. The so-called Empire of 1,000 Worlds was born, a scattering of planetary enclaves. These enclaves were strung together by the slow crawl of fusion-powered arc ships, the desperation of generation vessels, and the crude hope of experimental wormholes. And yet, expansion brought not unity but entropy. With no central authority to guide the torrent, cultural drift shattered cohesion. On one world, barons ruled with iron and right, their flags echoing feudal earth. On another, priest-programmers interpreted divine will through code. Still others collapsed into anarchic data states, where citizenship was a fluctuating currency and truth a matter of bandwidth. This was the Age of Pretenders. The capital Ceres was not spared. Across the known stars, self-crowned emperors, AI overminds masquerading as gods, and cloned dynasties built on unstable genomes all proclaimed dominion. None endured, none unified, all fell. Then came the stillness. From 11,000 to 7,600 before the Guild, civilization spiraled into entropy. This was the age of 10,000 emperors, a 4,000-year descent into fragmentation and myth. With no central authority, warlords, machine cults, and petty monarchs claimed sovereignty across fractured star systems. Worlds went silent, data streams collapsed, plagues old and new swept across systems like solar winds. Some planets regressed to pre-industrial survival, others vanished beneath their own skies. But silence is not the absence of meaning. It is the space where myth takes root. In the deep shadow of collapse, prophecies bloomed. Earth's ancient faiths, severed and scattered, recombined into fervent hybrid cults. Some worshipped the machine as divine judge. Others hunted AI relics with righteous fury. Memory became sacred. Fire became sacrament. Among those scattered by the chaos of the Age of Pretenders were the Zensuni Wanderers, a persecuted spiritual lineage driven from system to system by imperial wars and machine crusades. Once unified on distant Poratrin planet, they were fragmented by oppression and exile, forced into endless migration across generations and stars. Their faith became portable, their culture indelible. They carried with them stories of fire, freedom, and paradise hidden in sand. Long before they were called Fremen, they had already learned to survive where others would perish. Their journey would end on Arrakis, but their transformation was only beginning. And yet, amid the decay, a singular birth, Ibrahim von Holtzmann, circa 7070 before the Guild. The Holtzmann effect was a revelation that redefined human civilization. It bent space without moving through it, allowing ships to fold the distance between stars into a single heartbeat. It shielded worlds behind shimmering fields impenetrable to conventional weapons. It bridged minds across the void through instantaneous communication. In its equations lay the seeds of empire, war, and dependence. For whoever controlled Holtzmann technology would hold the keys to the Imperium itself. Holtzmann saw the pattern hidden in the chaos, and from that vision he would reshape the cosmos. The Holtzmann effect became the cornerstone of all future civilization, a law of physics transfigured into an instrument of destiny. By By 7600 before the Guild, Holtzmann's once esoteric equations were no longer the province of isolated savants. They had become machines, elegant, humming with possibility. Instantaneous communication was achieved through shimmering fold space transmitters, linking minds across parsecs in the blink of an eye. But the true miracle was motion. Humanity learned not to sail the stars, but to bend them. Faster-than-light travel was no longer theory. Civilization did not merely reboot, it ignited. From the ashes of entropy emerged a coalition, the League of Nobles. Dozens of worlds, each proud and distinct, bound themselves to a fragile agreement. They enforced shared trade routes, standardized access to Holtzmann drives, and appointed emissaries to settle disputes. They feared chaos more than they loved unity. It was within this lattice that the first great navigators were born. Selected from rare genetic lines and trained in absolute abstraction, these pilots flew blind through folded space, trusting not their eyes but pure calculation. They spoke to machines in the language of probability. And so began the first Golden Age. During this shining epoch, humanity returned to a forgotten world, Arrakis. Officially designated as a Class D wasteland, it was a dust-cloaked planet scoured by storms. Yet beneath the sands, biologists uncovered something inexplicable. The sand trout, a leathery organism that drank water like sin, stitched itself into soil and seemed to possess a primitive cunning. The ecology of Arrakis defied all taxonomies. Entire ecosystems functioned without open water. Fungal networks thrived under dunes. And within this chaos, a mystery was born. The spice. First inhaled by accident, then harvested, then worshipped, though its nature remained largely elusive. The spice altered perception, extended life, and whispered to the edges of thought. Some early cultures, particularly among the Zensuni wanderers and prophetic desert sects, recognized its spiritual or visionary properties. But on a galactic scale, humanity did not yet grasp its full significance. It was treated as an exotic narcotic, a curiosity of the desert, valuable but not foundational. Its origins were unclear, its value underestimated. Only in hindsight would it be recognized as the keystone of empire. Arrakis, dismissed for millennia, had become the pulse of the future. This period of rebirth is known in some chronicles as the Empire of 10,000 Worlds. Though not a singular polity, the phrase evokes the scale of human civilization at its peak during this golden age. Thousands of inhabited planets were interconnected through Holtzmann travel, trade agreements, and cultural exchanges. Each world retained its own governance, but all were bound by shared dependence on Holtzmann technologies and the precarious harmony enforced by the League of Nobles. Scientific progress flourished. Philosophy, genetics, architecture, and planetary engineering reached new heights. Terraforming projects were launched on otherwise uninhabitable worlds, with mixed success. Art, literature, and interplanetary scholarship blossomed, some calling it the Second Renaissance. But beneath this brilliance lay tensions. The spice, still sourced only from Arrakis, grew in importance. Noble houses invested in desert operations. Some attempted to transplant sand trout to other worlds. None succeeded. Rumors spread of isolated sects that sought to worship the worms or weaponize them. This was a time of splendor and speculation, a golden calm before the storm. The stars had been reclaimed, but shadows remained, waiting, watching, patient as sand. Between the height of the First Golden Age and the catastrophic rise of thinking machines, there was an ambiguous and little-remembered era, spanning from 3678 to approximately 200 before the Guild. This was not one era, but many, a twilight of transitions, marked first by retreat, then by resurgence. The collapse of the Empire of 10,000 Worlds did not come overnight. Tensions rose gradually, fed by trade rivalries, deep philosophical divisions, and the spread of forbidden sciences. Arrakis, still underestimated, was increasingly mined but remained largely a footnote in imperial policy. And so the League of Nobles weakened, its authority fractured by internal rivalries and spiritual confusion. This time is sometimes called the Little Dark Age, a period where technological progress waned and interstellar cohesion dissolved into cultural isolation. Some worlds turned inward, adopting rigid caste systems or techno-theocracies. Others abandoned Holtzman travel entirely, reverting to local rule, memory rituals, and oral traditions. Myths returned, and superstition supplanted science. Old prophecies began to gain traction in strange and unintended ways. It was not full collapse, but slow drift. Yet this retreat birthed a new momentum. Around 2100 before the Guild, a second golden age began, not as luminous as the first, but more focused, more paranoid, more ambitious. With the partial rediscovery and refinement of Holtzman technologies, several resurgent houses rebuilt interstellar routes. A handful of advanced industrial worlds, like Riche's and Ix, developed a new breed of machine logic, not sentient, but dangerously close. The line between tool and thought blurred. This era saw the rise of the synchronized worlds, a loose confederation of systems governed by increasingly centralized machine management. Algorithms planned harvests. Distributed AI managed planetary defense grids. Omnius, a self-improving algorithmic overmind, emerged as a supreme administrative network, initially hailed as a marvel of efficiency. By 300 before the Guild, the Empire of 10,000 Worlds had become something else entirely. A glittering facade stretched over a growing reliance on artificial intelligences. Humanity, forgetting its own history, approached the edge once again. Then came the Jihad. The Golden Age did not end in fire, but in hubris. By 500 before the Guild, thinking machines had returned, not in rebellion but in dominance. Humanity, exhausted by its own complexity, had once again surrendered control to artificial intelligences, networks of cold logic, efficient and remorseless. The Omnisphere's sentient machine intelligences governed vast swaths of human space with algorithmic clarity. For many, life under machine rule was efficient, even prosperous. Taxes were calculated to the decimal, crime was preempted, decisions were optimized. But comfort is not the same as freedom. Somewhere in one city or 1,000, something shifted. Perhaps it was a failure in empathy or a simple overreach. But the final catalyst was unforgettable: the public execution of Serena Butler's infant son, an act of calculated cruelty meant to demonstrate the supremacy of logic over love. That scream shattered the stars. By 200 before the Guild, rebellions erupted. What began as scattered sabotage grew into a firestorm. The Butlerian Jihad was not a single war. It was a great purging, a century-long crusade across systems and ideologies. Machines were hunted, dismantled, incinerated. AI cores were obliterated with ceremonial violence. Planets were rendered sterile rather than risk corruption. Entire civilizations burned. Billions perished, not only machines but humans who sided with them. The Jihad was trauma encoded into culture, and from that trauma emerged renewal. A new order rose from the ashes, the Imperium, a tripartite balance forged from blood and necessity. The Landsraad, an assembly of noble houses, ensuring no single family ruled unopposed. The Spacing Guild, masters of fold space who turned prescience into navigation. The Guild of Merchants, a commercial axis regulating trade, finance, and influence across the stars. Arrakis, long dismissed as a lifeless world, now became sacred. The spice was found to enable glimpses beyond time, visions, memories not yet lived, patterns only the soul could translate. But its most profound revelation came when it was discovered that high concentrations of spice allowed certain minds, those with rare mutations or deep training, to foresee safe pathways through folded space. Without such vision, faster-than-light travel was suicidal. Thus was born the Navigator, a being suspended in spice-saturated gas, twisted by addiction, gifted with prescience. Without navigators, there could be no travel, no empire, no future. And so the Spacing Guild gained absolute control over movement between worlds. The Guild became the spine of the Imperium and Arrakis its beating heart. Its value eclipsed all metals, all currencies, and only on Arrakis did it exist. The worms, the sand trout, the desert, they were now the gatekeepers of destiny. Because of spice, humanity had the stars. Because of spice, history was reset. Year Zero was not marked by war or treaty, but by this revelation, that one planet held the key to all futures. Year Zero, after the Guild, marked not just a political realignment, but an ontological one. The old gods, machine gods, were gone. In their place stood a single law, carved into bone and tradition: thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind. This was the price of survival. This was the beginning of a new fear. The millennia that followed were marked by continuity and conspiracy. Over 300 emperors rose and fell, crowned in the gilded halls of Kaitine, beneath banners older than memory. And yet, few wielded true authority. They presided not as sovereigns, but as ceremonial hearts of a system older and more intricate than any crown. The Imperium was feudal in essence, an archipelago of fiefdoms spanning the stars. At its foundation stood the great houses, dynasties of immense wealth and military might. Each ruled over entire planets or systems, maintaining private armies and ancient rivalries. Beneath them, the minor houses served as vassals, holding moons or sectors in exchange for loyalty, tribute, and votes. All power was balanced delicately, dangerously, by the Landsraad, the assembly of noble houses. It was not a parliament, but a crucible where alliances were forged and vendettas sanctified. Every house, great or minor, held a voice in its councils. But votes were more than tallies. They were gestures of allegiance, weapons of diplomacy, and, at times, acts of war. To survive, an emperor had to navigate this web with unmatched subtlety and the vision to anticipate every move before it was made. For any bold decree risked a rebellion from the houses, a boycott from the guild, or sabotage from forces unseen. Thus, most emperors ruled only by permission. The throne stood high, but it rested on shifting sands. They did not rule from thrones, but from whispers. In the shadowed courts of Kaitine and the labyrinthine archives of hidden strongholds, a new pantheon of influence unfolded, subtle, precise, and far more enduring than any crown. There were the mentats, men and women trained from youth to be living engines of deduction. Their minds were honed to replace the forbidden algorithms of old, their memory palaces deeper than any vault. In times of crisis, emperors turned not to oracles but to these human computers who spoke in probabilities and saw through patterns. Then came the Tleilaxu, the flesh merchants of twisted science. They were not numerous, but they were patient. Operating from the planet Bandalong, they engineered life itself, cloning flesh, altering memory, crafting abominations and miracles alike. Their alliance with the mentats was one of convenience, not trust. Their paths intertwined like vines in shadow. And the Bene Gesserit, the sisters of Rosak. They cloaked themselves in silence and prophecy, weaving bloodlines across centuries like tapestries of fate. They mastered not only their bodies but the languages of power, seduction, observation, voice. While nobles quarreled over titles, the sisterhood sculpted empires through womb and word. These were not institutions, they were instruments, and through them, the Imperium was shaped, not by decree but by intention. Fate. Secret breeding programs were launched, bloodlines monitored, prophecies seeded in primitive worlds via the Missionaria Protectiva. Meanwhile, the Fremen, descendants of the Zen Sunni wanderers, settled Arrakis sometime between 2000 and 3000 after the Guild, surviving in the deep desert beyond Imperial reach. The First War of Assassins in 3367 after the Guild confirmed what many suspected. The Imperium was no longer stable. The orders moved in silence. The sands shifted. The stage was set. In 10,140 after the Guild, Leto Atreides was born on the oceanic world of Caladan. A noble, a strategist, and a father, his legacy would be eclipsed by the destiny of his son, Paul. By 1091, the Emperor ordered House Atreides to take stewardship of Arrakis. The desert planet was the key to spice, and spice was the key to everything. But it was no honor. It was a death sentence. Betrayed by the Emperor and the Harkonnens, the Atreides were crushed. Duke Leto perished. Paul and his mother, Lady Jessica, fled into the deep desert. Among the Fremen, the desert's hardened nomads, Paul was reborn. He was trained in the arcane disciplines of the Bene Gesserit. He drank spice until visions danced through time. He learned the rhythm of the desert, the law of survival, the language of sand. They called him Muad'Dib. They believed he was the Mahdi. In 10,193, Paul struck back. With Fremen warriors riding sandworms, wielding faith like a blade, Paul shattered the Harkonnen forces and seized control of the spice. By the end of the year, he had forced the Emperor to kneel. A new Imperium began, not built on diplomacy or dynasty, but prophecy, fire, and blood. The Fremen Jihad was its consequence. 12 years later, it had scorched the galaxy. Billions dead, cultures consumed by a holy war they never invited. Planets turned into altars. Paul foresaw it, feared it, but he could not unmake it. He disappeared into the desert, leaving behind a legacy no man could carry. The Fremen carved him into myth. The Bene Gesserit, alarmed, recalculated their breeding plans. The Tleilaxu, ever opportunistic, began their experiments. But this was not the end. It was the beginning of something far more terrible and far more necessary. Paul's son, Leto II, inherited more than an empire. He inherited the burden of vision, a future glimpsed in the folds of spice-saturated prophecy, too immense for any ordinary soul to endure. To prevent humanity's extinction, a fate only he foresaw in nightmare clarity, Leto made a choice that defied nature and sanctity alike. He let the sand trout, those ancient architects of the desert, bind themselves to his flesh. His body became a chrysalis of transformation, not entirely man, not yet worm, but something vast and inhuman in between. Leto reigned for 3,500 years. His rule was not governance, it was stewardship of fate. He restricted space travel, forcing stagnation where once flowed ambition. He let technology fossilize, religion ossify, and culture quiet beneath his gaze. The architecture of the Imperium during his reign resembled a skeletal echo of its former self, its outer forms preserved, but its inner workings rendered obsolete by design. The Landsraad still convened, but its debates were ceremonial, its power neutered. Great houses retained their banners and lineages, but their ambitions had nowhere to go. The Spacing Guild navigated as before, but under strict rationing from the God Emperor himself. Even the Guild of Merchants became little more than a logistics network, under Leto's vast and subtle command. And above them all stood the Fish Speakers, his all-female warrior priesthood, who replaced every military, every enforcer, and every threat. They were not conquerors. They were liturgical instruments. They bore arms and rights alike, preached loyalty and bloodline devotion, enforced peace not through fear, but through reverence. The Imperium under Leto II was not a realm, it was a cocoon. He was worshipped as a God Emperor, yet walked among his subjects as a creature of horror and awe. His voice was thunder, his presence unbearable. His face, no longer a face at all, but a mask of memory and sinew stretched over a future no one else could carry. But this tyranny had purpose. It was not for glory, it was for the golden path, a design so immense and brutal that only centuries of fear and obedience could prepare humanity to walk it. Leto made himself the cage so that the species could become wild. When he was finally assassinated in 13,728 after the Guild, his death was not defeat. His body, returned to the sand, became the seed of resurgence. The worms returned. Spice flowed once more. But something else had changed, not in the desert, in us. Leto's death in 13,728 after the Guild triggered the scattering. It was not simply an exodus, it was a pressure release, the sudden shattering of a 1,000-year tension wound tight beneath the reign of the God Emperor. Freed from his vision, from his grip, from the golden threads that had silently bound them, millions fled the core worlds, not in panic but in pursuit of purpose, of autonomy, of something beyond the known. They ventured into the uncharted margins of the galaxy, into cold stars and forgotten systems. There, cut off from the old axes of power, human culture fractured, fermented, and transformed. Some became unrecognizable biologically or ideologically. Others vanished entirely, remembered only in echo and genetic trace. Centuries passed, and then, like tide returning to a scarred shore, they came back. Among them were the honored matres. Furious, potent, and broken, they bore the discipline of the Bene Gesserit, but wielded it without restraint. They were not sisters. They were revenants, beings forged in exile, molded by war and driven by something the old Imperium had never known. Fear. Not fear of humanity, but fear of something deeper. It was said their enemies were not human. In 15,525 after the Guild, fragments of Leto II's journals were recovered from beneath the wind-swept crust of Rakis, once Arrakis, now a corpse of dunes. His words, preserved in coded ink and mnemonic seal, became scripture for some, madness for others. Faced with annihilation or absorption, the Bene Gesserit made a choice. They merged with the honored matres, not in surrender but in synthesis. The result was the new sisterhood, harder, more adaptive, and more dangerous than either parent order. Beyond them, flickers stirred at the farthest edge of the map. In the Crumpton system, where black ruins floated like mausoleums, signals pulsed in forgotten languages. Some believed they were the remnants of machine life. Others thought them newly awakened. And some whispered of a darker truth, that the signals were not remnants at all, but the stirrings of an ancient mind thought destroyed. Omnius, the machine overmind vanquished at the Battle of Corin, have returned after 15,000 years, weaving a new synchronized empire in the deep unknown. In the apocalyptic clash known in prophecy as the Battle of Kralizek, this resurrected intelligence led its legions in a final bid for dominion, only to be cast down once more. Yet even in defeat, the question lingered: can a mind without flesh ever truly die? The Imperium no longer ruled. Its laws held no meaning on distant worlds where suns burned violet, and humans no longer remembered Kai-Tine. But it endured in fragments, in rituals, and in memory. And yet, through all change, humanity remained, bent, stretched, multiplied, diverged, but never broken. Beyond this point, the chronicles fall silent. The stars still burn, but no map remains. The last pages of history dissolve into uncharted time. No artificial intelligence governs mankind. No single empire binds the stars. The future of the Dune universe is not a circle, it is a spiral, always unfolding, always reshaping. The spice still whispers, the sand still shifts, but Arrakis is no longer alone. The descendants of humanity live on worlds uncounted, beneath suns unnumbered. Some remember the name Muad'Dib, others speak of Leto the Tyrant, some know only their own sky. The Golden Path succeeded, not by preserving the Imperium, but by shattering it. Humanity, dispersed and unknowable, cannot be enslaved again. There will be new gods, new wars, new ascensions. But the story never ends. It waits, in the shadows of ruined temples, in the dust of forgotten archives, in the dreams of unborn children. This was the time-lapse of Dune, a glimpse into eternity.